The Battle of Kursk was one of the most intense battles of the Second World War, and it also became a catastrophic defeat for the German army in 1943. Because of the failure of Operation Citadel, Germany lost the ability to carry out large-scale offensive operations of this kind until the very end of the war. Strategic initiative passed to the Soviet army. Let us look at the Battle of Kursk from the German point of view and find out why they lost. World of Tanks celebrates its anniversary this year. The game is constantly evolving. Already now you are waiting for top-tier graphics, more than 600 vehicles, and regular updates. Register via the link in the description and instantly receive premium tanks, including vehicles such as the BT-7 artillery units and the Soviet T-29, machines with devastating guns and excellent mobility. In addition to developing your skills and earning credits in battles, you can also receive another Tier 6 premium tank, the A-46. Hurry up and claim a bag of gifts before October 12th. Register right now. After the retreat from Stalingrad and the loss of previously occupied territories, Germany pinned its hopes for a turning point in the war on the battle near Kursk. Hitler needed to show his allies, neutral states, and the entire world that Germany was still a formidable opponent. He also wanted to gain a tactical advantage by controlling the Kursk railways and highways. For this purpose, the German command began developing the plan for Operation Citadel. The plan envisioned the creation of two powerful strike groups on the northern and southern salients of the German front, delivering a concentrated blow toward eastern Kursk in order to encircle and destroy Soviet forces. The ultimate goal was to regain the initiative in the spring-summer campaign of 1943. On the German side, the operation involved forces of Army Group Center under Walter Model, striking from the north, and Army Group South under Erich von Manstein, delivering the southern breakthrough. In total, up to 800,000 men, nearly 5,000 tanks, and aircraft took part in the operation. There were serious disagreements between the German military leadership and Hitler regarding the feasibility of Operation Citadel. Some commanders proposed abandoning the offensive and preparing for strategic defense. Erich von Manstein suggested launching the operation immediately, without waiting for the end of the spring mud season, in order to prevent the Red Army from strengthening its defenses. However, this plan was rejected. Hitler had his own strategy. Due to delays in preparation, it was decided to postpone the start of the operation by 2 months. This time was intended to bring up new reserves mobilized in Germany, and most importantly, to wait for the arrival of new Tiger and Panther tanks, which Hitler believed would become a decisive argument for victory. As a result, the German offensive began 2 months later than originally planned. On the morning of July 5th, Operation Citadel began. The Red Army's artillery counter-preparation immediately revealed one of the Germans' fatal mistakes. The element of surprise had already been lost. Soviet intelligence, including agent networks and intercepted radio messages, with assistance from British intelligence, had been aware of German plans throughout the spring. Stalin personally received reports from agents in Switzerland and Germany about the upcoming offensive on Kursk. One of the sources was John Cairncross, a double agent working for British intelligence, who had transmitted information about Operation Citadel at an early stage. As a result, Stalin decided to meet the enemy head-on. Over several months, the Red Army constructed extensive defensive lines along the entire length of the Kursk salient. Despite German expectations, 50 Wehrmacht divisions and thousands of vehicles entering the battle were met by nearly 2 million Soviet soldiers. Massive defensive fortifications, minefields, and anti-tank obstacles. In addition to preparing for the German offensive, the Soviets employed partisan warfare in the enemy rear to disrupt supply lines and communications. Soviet partisans destroyed around 300 locomotives, 1,500 rail cars, and 44 bridges, which significantly delayed the German advance. Overall, the Soviet side deployed about 2 million soldiers and roughly 8,000 tanks and aircraft. In terms of manpower and armored vehicles, the advantage was overwhelming. After the fighting began on July 5, German forces in the south managed to advance and capture several positions, despite heavy losses caused by fierce Soviet resistance and extensive minefields. They succeeded in creating a breakthrough wedge into the first of the three defensive lines built along the eastern side of the Kursk salient. Units of Kemp's detachment crossed the river and advanced about 10 kilometers at the cost of heavy losses. However, Soviet resistance, strong fortifications, and unfavorable terrain halted the overall advance. The Wehrmacht failed to break through the second line of Soviet defenses. In the north, the 47th Panzer Corps began its offensive on July 5. Minefields and strong defensive structures slowed the German advance. Interrogation of a captured Soviet soldier revealed a weak sector in the Soviet defenses, and Tiger tanks were sent there. 90 T-34 tanks were thrown into the fight against the Tigers. After 3 hours of intense combat, the Soviets lost 40 tanks, while the Germans lost only 7. However, the time gained allowed the Soviets to seal the weak point in their defenses. In the following days, the Germans attempted to break through toward Panayrai and Alkavakka. While they managed to advance in some areas, Soviet tank concentrations around Alkavakka remained impregnable. Meanwhile, in the south, the Luftwaffe carried out what is considered the first instance in history of a tank formation being destroyed exclusively by airstrikes. Around 50 tanks were knocked out. This temporarily delayed the Wehrmacht's advance. Nevertheless, the decisive point became Prokhorovka. The Battle of Prokhorovka was one of the largest tank battles of the war, second only to later engagements. German success here would have meant the encirclement of Soviet forces. The Germans had 294 tanks, while the Red Army committed 616 tanks. Fierce fighting for the town lasted the entire day. In the end, the Germans were unable to achieve a breakthrough, and the risk of being cut off from their supply lines became too great. The German forces began an organized withdrawal. The Battle of Prokhorovka was lost, and at that point it became clear that Operation Citadel had failed. In the north, the fate of Army Group Center was no better. On July 12, the Soviets launched Operation Kutuzov toward Orel. With no real possibility of continuing the offensive, the Germans withdrew their forces to avoid the destruction of their best tank units. The southern flank was attacked later, but the results were no less disastrous for Germany. Kharkov was lost. Large-scale counteroffensives followed. From this moment on, the initiative firmly belonged to the USSR, forcing the Wehrmacht into a continuous retreat to the south. The Battle of Kursk was lost for several reasons. First, the factor of surprise, on which German generals had heavily relied, was completely lost due to the successful actions of Soviet intelligence. The plan for Operation Citadel reached the Soviet command literally a day after its creation. Second, the offensive was simply not adequately prepared. Even without considering losses and secrecy issues, the German army was numerically inferior in both manpower and equipment, and had to break through a deeply prepared, entrenched enemy. Third, the Tiger tanks were indeed excellent machines. At Prokhorovka, Tigers managed to hold off attacks by 50 Soviet tanks, destroying 22 of them. However, their small numbers could not compensate for the fundamental strategic and operational problems described above. Subscribe so you don't miss future videos presenting the German point of view. Also watch Stalingrad from the German perspective and the Normandy landings through German eyes. Like the video and leave your comments.